It was New Year's Eve 2019, and I was 25. I just moved into a new apartment in a mid-rise building, a stone's throw from downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it had these floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room that gave me a panoramic view of the city, especially the skyline. I figured it'd be the perfect spot to catch the fireworks at midnight. The day started off normal, a little too normal. I ran some errands, picked up champagne, and got ready for a quiet night in. I'm not a big party person, but I didn't want to miss the fireworks either, so I planned to chill, toast at midnight, and maybe FaceTime a couple of friends. By 9 p.m., the city was already buzzing. I could hear distant laughter, car horns, and music bleeding through the walls from my neighbors. It felt alive, like the city was holding its breath for the big moment. But my night took a sharp left turn around 10 p.m. It started with a knock on my door. Not the polite kind either. It was loud, urgent. 3 quick bangs. Bam, bam, bam. I froze for a second because I wasn't expecting anyone. And let's be real, who just shows up unannounced on New Year's Eve? I opened the door a crack and there was this guy, mid-40s maybe. He looked off. Messy hair, pale dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. He was wearing a suit, but it was wrinkled and stained, like he'd been in it way too long. "Hey, sorry to bother you," he said, fidgeting with his hands. I think I've got the wrong apartment." "No worries," I said, ready to close the door. "Wait," he blurted, holding up a hand. "You haven't seen a girl about this tall, long black hair, red dress?" He gestured about shoulder height. She might have come this way." I shook my head. "No, sorry, haven't seen anyone like that." He muttered something under his breath and nodded. "Okay, sorry to bother you. Happy New Year," he said, turning to leave. But as I closed the door, I caught a glimpse of something, a dark stain on his sleeve, near the cuff. It looked like blood. I stood there for a moment, heart racing, trying to convince myself it was ketchup or wine or something. But it didn't sit right with me. By 11 p.m., I'd mostly shaken it off. The city noise was getting louder, and I was sipping champagne, scrolling on my phone, waiting for midnight. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a light blinking in the window of the building across from mine. Not like Christmas lights or anything festive. It was deliberate, almost rhythmic. 3 short flashes, pause. 3 long flashes, pause. 3 short flashes again. I'm no genius, but even I know Morse code for SOS when I see it. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in with the camera. The light was coming from an apartment on the 8th floor, directly across from me. The blinds were partially drawn, but I could make out someone's silhouette. It looked like a woman. I debated calling the cops, but what was I gonna say? "Hi, I think someone's flashing an SOS across the street?" It felt thin. So I decided to wait, see if it happened again. And it did. Same pattern. SOS. I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my coat, my phone, and my keys and headed across the street. The building's front door was propped open. A group of partygoers had just walked in, laughing and stumbling over each other. I slipped in behind them and took the elevator to the 8th floor. The hallway was eerily quiet, especially compared to the noise outside. I found the door where the light had come from. 812. I knocked softly at first, then louder when no one answered. "Hello? Is everything okay in there?" I called out. No response. My heart was pounding as I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it turned. The door was unlocked. The apartment was dark except for a small desk lamp in the corner. The place was a mess, overturned chairs, papers scattered everywhere. And then I saw her, a woman in a red dress, tied to a chair in the living room. She had a gag in her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Before I could react, I felt something cold and sharp press against the back of my neck. "Turn around." Slowly, a voice said. It was the man from earlier. The one who'd knocked on my door. I turned, hands raised. He was holding a knife, his eyes wild and desperate. "I told you to stay out of it," he hissed. "But you just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. He was between me and the door. The woman was sobbing, shaking her head like she was trying to warn me. "Look, man, you don't have to do this," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Whatever this is, we can fix it. Just put the knife down." "Fix it," he laughed bitterly. "You don't even know what's going on." "Then tell me," I said. "Help me understand." For a second, I thought he might. His grip on the knife loosened and he looked down, almost ashamed. That's when I made my move. I grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from the coffee table and swung it as hard as I could at his head. He staggered, the knife clattering to the floor. I didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. I untied the woman, grabbed her hand, and we bolted out of there, not stopping until we were back in my apartment. I called the cops, and they arrived within minutes. They found him unconscious in the apartment across the street. Turns out he'd been stalking the woman for months. She'd moved to a new city to escape him, but he'd found her on social media. That night, the fireworks lit up the sky, but I couldn't enjoy them. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice. New Year's Eve is supposed to be about new beginnings, but for me, it'll always be the night I learned how quickly things can go wrong and how far someone will go to protect themselves. I used to love New Year's Eve. There was something magical about watching the clock tick down, champagne glasses clinking, and the promise of a fresh start. But last year, New Year's Eve became the night I stopped believing in clean slates. It started off normal. My friends and I rented this gorgeous Airbnb out in the countryside. It was isolated, peaceful, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a panoramic view of the snowy hills. We were all looking forward to a night of good food, bad dancing, and maybe some fireworks at midnight. There were 6 of us: me, my best friend Kevin, his girlfriend Laura, my sister Ellie, and her 2 college friends, Sam and Olivia. The group was a mix of people who knew each other well and some who didn't, but the vibe was good. Everyone was in high spirits, dressed up in their New Year's best. Around 10 p.m., Kevin started fiddling with the stereo, trying to get the music just right, while the rest of us huddled around the kitchen island, putting the finishing touches on appetizers and cracking open bottles of Prosecco. That's when we noticed the knock at the door. We all froze. The cabin was miles from the nearest neighbor, and no one else was supposed to join us. Kevin, always the brave one, joked, "Maybe it's Santa." "He's a little late, though." Laura shot him a look. "Not funny. Who'd come all the way out here?" The knock came again, louder this time. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Kevin shrugged and went to answer it. "Relax. It's probably just someone lost or something." When he opened the door, a man was standing there. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, wearing an old black coat that looked too thin for the weather. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but his lips were curled into the kind of smile that makes you uneasy rather than welcome. "Evening," the man said, his voice calm and measured. "Sorry to bother you. My car broke down a little ways back and my phone's dead. Mind if I come in and warm up while I figure out my next steps?" Kevin hesitated, glancing back at us. Ellie mouthed, "No," but Kevin, ever the good Samaritan, stepped aside. Sure, come in. It's freezing out there." The man stepped inside, bringing a gust of icy air with him. He looked around the room slowly, like he was memorizing every detail. "Nice place you've got here. Big celebration." "Yeah, just a small thing with friends," Kevin said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can I, get you something?" "Coffee, water." The man shook his head. "No, thank you. I won't be long." He lingered near the door, his gaze settling on each of us in turn. When his eyes landed on me, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he looked at me, like he knew something I didn't, made my stomach twist. "So," Laura said, clearly uncomfortable, "where's your car? Maybe we can call someone for you." The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Finally, he said, "Oh, it's not far. Don't trouble yourselves. I just needed to get out of the cold for a bit." Kevin nodded awkwardly. "Well, okay then. Stay as long as you need." The man didn't sit down or take off his coat. He just stood there, watching us. The room felt heavy, like all the air had been sucked out. We tried to carry on, but the party vibe was gone. Ellie kept glancing at the man, Sam was practically glued to his phone, and Olivia stayed close to the kitchen, pretending to fuss over the food. At 11:30, the man spoke again. "Almost midnight," he said, his voice soft but cutting through the room like a knife. "Do you have your resolutions ready?" None of us answered. The question hung in the air, unnerving and out of place. He smiled, showing teeth that were just a little too white, a little too sharp. "It's important, you know, to start the year off right." "Yeah," I said finally, trying to break the tension. "Got a few in mind." His smile widened. "Good, good." He reached into his pocket, and for a split second, I thought he was going to pull out a knife. Instead, he took out an old-fashioned pocket watch and flicked it open. 11:35, he murmured. "Plenty of time." "For what?" Laura asked, her voice shaking slightly. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the window and stared out into the snowy darkness. "It's beautiful out here," he said. "So quiet, so far from everything." Kevin cleared his throat. "Yeah, that's why we picked it. Peaceful, you know." The man turned to look at him, and for the first time, his expression changed. The smile dropped, replaced by something colder, hungrier. "Peaceful," he repeated. "Yes, that's one word for it." The next 30 minutes felt like an eternity. The man didn't say much, but his presence was suffocating. When the clock finally hit 11:59, he walked back to the center of the room and said, "Shall we count down together?" We all exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to, but no one dared to refuse. Kevin turned on the TV, pulling up the live broadcast from Times Square. The ball was dropping, the crowd was cheering. But in that room, the tension was unbearable. 10, the man said, his voice low but commanding. We joined in, our voices shaky. 9, 8, 7. As we counted down, the man reached into his coat again. This time, he pulled out something wrapped in a cloth. I couldn't see what it was, but the way his hands moved, it wasn't good. 3, 2, 1. "Happy New Year," he said, his voice dripping with something that wasn't joy. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small, blood-stained hammer. Before anyone could react, he slammed it down onto the coffee table, shattering the glass and sending shards flying. We screamed, jumping to our feet. But when we turned back to the man, he was gone. The front door was wide open, snow blowing in, but there were no footprints outside. None. We left that cabin the next morning, cutting our trip short. None of us have talked about it since. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I know one thing. I'll never spend New Year's Eve in the middle of nowhere again. New Year's Eve was supposed to be just another night at the bar for me. You know, the usual drill, cracking jokes with customers, counting down to midnight, and making sure no one did anything too stupid. I'd been bartending at the Rusty Nail for 3 years by then, and I thought I'd seen it all. But that night changed everything. It started with a guy who came in around 9:30. The bar wasn't packed yet, just the regulars. Billy at the end of the bar nursing his beer, Lucy the waitress flirting with a group of college kids, and me polishing glasses. pretending I cared about the game on TV. The guy didn't look out of place at first. Mid-30s, average build, dark hoodie pulled tight against the cold. He had this nervous energy though, like he'd just walked in from a fight or was about to start one. He slid onto a stool and ordered a whiskey. Straight. I poured it, and when I handed it to him, our eyes met. His were bloodshot, darting around like he was trying to spot something or someone who wasn't there. "Busy night ahead?" I asked, just to break the silence. He didn't answer at first, just stared at the drink in his hand. Then he muttered, "Depends. Midnight's a funny thing." "How so?" "It's a door," he said, looking at me dead in the eye now. "You step through and you don't always know what's on the other side." Okay, weird. But hey, bartenders hear all kinds of stuff, so I just nodded and moved on. The guy nursed his whiskey for a while, and I got busy with the usual rush of New Year's Eve revelers. By the time the countdown was about to start, I'd almost forgotten about him. Then the power went out. It was instant. 1 second, the bar was lit up with neon signs and the glow of the TV, and the next, we were plunged into darkness. There were a couple of gasps, some nervous laughter, and then the light from people's phones started popping up. I went to check the breaker box, but everything looked fine. "It's not the power," the guy said from his stool. His voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. "It's midnight." "What's that supposed to mean?" I shot back, more annoyed than anything. Before he could answer, the temperature in the bar dropped. Fast. You know that kind of cold that's so sharp it feels like it's cutting into your skin? It was like someone had opened a freezer door, except worse. I could see my breath, and the condensation on the windows started to frost over. People were shivering, rubbing their arms, looking at me for answers. "All right, everyone, stay calm," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll figure this out." "You can't fix it," the guy said. He was standing now, his drink untouched. "It's here." "What's here?" I asked, but he just shook his head. "That's when we heard it." A low, guttural sound, like a growl mixed with the rumble of a distant engine. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The college kids laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of prank. But the regulars? They weren't laughing. Neither was I. The sound got louder, and then something slammed into the front door. Hard. The whole bar shook and someone screamed. Another slam and the door buckled, the wood splintering like it was made of toothpicks. I grabbed the bat we kept behind the counter, my heart hammering in my chest. "Everyone, get to the back!" I shouted. "Now!" Most of them listened, scrambling toward the kitchen. But the guy in the hoodie just stood there, staring at the door like he was expecting it. The growling stopped, and for a second, everything was silent. Then the door exploded inward. It wasn't human. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human. The thing crouched in the doorway, its massive frame blocking out what little light came from the street. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over a gaunt, skeletal body. Eyes like black holes, and a mouth full of jagged teeth that seemed to go on forever. It sniffed the air, then let out this unholy screech that made my ears ring. The guy stepped forward, calm as anything, and pulled something out of his pocket. A knife? No, it was more like a shard of glass, but it glowed faintly, like it had its own light. "Stay back," he said, more to the creature than to me. The thing lunged at him, and I swear, time seemed to slow down. He moved fast, faster than any person should be able to, dodging the swipe of its claws and plunging the shard into its chest. The creature screamed, this horrible high-pitched wail that made me want to drop to my knees and cover my ears. But I couldn't look away. The shard started to glow brighter, and the creature thrashed, its body convulsing. Then, with one final ear-splitting screech, it collapsed into a heap on the floor. The guy yanked the shard free, wiped it on his jeans, and turned to me. "Midnight's over," he said, like that explained anything. Before I could ask what the hell just happened, he walked out into the night. The power came back on a few minutes later, and the temperature returned to normal, but the bar was empty except for me and the regulars. No one said a word about what we'd seen. What could we say? I quit the next day, moved to a new city, started fresh. But every New Year's Eve, I can't help but wonder, what's really waiting on the other side of midnight?